It's the movie that almost wasn't, and now the third MCU Spider-Man has another surprise. Jamie Foxx's Electro is back, and Doctor Strange has joined the fun. Is the Sinister Six finally coming together? It's been at the top of Sony's wish list since it acquired the rights to Spider-Man all those years ago. They want a Sinister Six movie. After two franchises failed to provide a launching pad for the wider Spider-Verse, the MCU and Sony have a unique opportunity to get their dream when Marvel adopts the villain from Amazing Spider-Man 2, Jamie Foxx's Electro. It has been a pretty exciting week down Spider-Man way. The Hollywood Reporter announced that Jamie Foxx would be returning to the role of Electro for the third installment of the MCU's Spider-Man. Foxx joins J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson from the Sam Raimi series as the second actor from a previous Spider-Man franchise to find their way into the current one. And just as we were starting to adjust to that news, the guest list grew one larger on the third installment that begins filming in late October. The master of the mystical arts, Doctor Strange, will be joining the cast. Then, in Fox's exuberance to take on the wall crawler one more time, he might have shown us more than we were supposed to know. Don't you love it when that happens? In a quickly deleted Instagram post, we got some artwork showing three Spider-Men. Three Spider-Men looking at a sky covered in blue lightning, but with the assurance that this time he won't be blue. That, of course, refers to Fox's Ultimates-inspired look for Electro. While the quasi-Dr. Manhattan look might not be everyone's favorite, the green suit with the lightning headpiece was always going to be a tough sell, so there's no telling how Max Dillon will look in this movie. J. Jonah has already set that standard, with the MCU's Daily Bugle being an online sensationalist news site rather than a long-running New York newspaper, and he lacks his iconic crew-cut hair. It's not just a new look for Electro or a new mentor for Peter. He sure is going through those quickly. First Tony Stark and then a reasonable facsimile of Nick Fury. No, it's what this combination of casting could mean for the future of the wall crawler and that Sinister Six movie that Sony has wanted to make for so long. Up until this point, the MCU has been adamant about not recycling villains. Spider-Man's longtime foe and close friend, because Spider-Man's relationships are nothing if not consistently tinged with tragedy, Green Goblin has appeared in no less than 3 Spider-Man films so far. Rather than deal with the baggage from the previous 5 Spider-Man movies, the MCU created their own web of baddies with the Vulture, Shocker, Tinkerer, and Mysterio. But if they brought back a character and the actor from a previous franchise, why this one? It might not just be to fill out the Sinister Six, but indicate a way for the Spidey haters to come together while still navigating the thorny issue of film rights. If you count up the characters in the MCU and the Sony so far Spider-Man-less Spider-Verse, you get a pretty comfortable number. Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, was keeping Peter Parker's secret for his own revenge scheme. He won't even give the identity to Mac Gargan, the Scorpion, in prison. Last we saw of the second Shocker, he was webbed up against the school bus. Mysterio didn't survive the events of Far From Home, but then again, Mysterio is a notorious fibber. Over on the Sony lot, some Spider-Man villains have been piling up, including Spidey's most dedicated frenemy, Venom. But it's Morbius that ships the Sinister Six movie more than anyone, and that's down to the surprise cameo in that trailer. Adrian Toomes showing up in a Sony movie changes the calculus. Prior to that moment, it was generally assumed that the extended Spider-Verse and Sony were completely separate from the MCU's Spider-Man, and never the twain shall meet. But with one What's Up Doc and now the casting of a past franchise's villain and actor, all bets are off. By the time that third MCU Spider-Man movie comes out, the world will contain Vulture, Shocker, Morbius, Venom, Electro, Scorpion, maybe Mysterio? More than enough to form the Sinister Six. With a Kraven the Hunter movie in the works at Sony, the choices for the Sinister Six movie start to stack up. All of this leaves the giant question mark on how the Sinister Six will come about and what it will mean when it comes to the two shared universes. One thing is certain, something changed between the first Disney and Sony deal with Spider-Man and the renewed one, and not just a third MCU movie and guest appearance in someone else's MCU movie. Toomes' appearance in Morbius and Jamie Foxx's Electro crossing Spider-Man franchises opens multiple worlds of possibilities. That question got a lot easier to answer once we learned learned that Doctor Strange was making his way to the party. Of all of Sony's attempts to work towards a Sinister Six movie, Amazing Spider-Man 2 got the closest. While Electro was the headline baddie for the second outing of Andrew Garfield as the wall crawler, it also featured a new version of the Green Goblin, just in time to play out a version of the comic book's tragic end of Gwen Stacy. It wasn't the Green Goblin that made the Sinister Six even more likely though, but what was in the Green Goblin's basement of tech horrors. A freshly captured Osborn gets a visit from the gentleman himself, Gustav Fiers, and is tasked with finding candidates for the Hall of Horrors. In this case, Alexei Sitsevich and the Rhino armor. On the way to the Rhino armor, we also saw Doc Ock's additional arms and Vulture's wings, and of course, Osborn's determination to form a small group of ne'er-do-wells. There's no indication that Parker's original chief rival will make a fourth appearance in the next Spider-Man movie, and the field is full enough that a Sinister Six doesn't need him. But the plan was forming when Max Dillon was working out his issues by fighting with Spider-Man. There is one clue as to how this will all play out that happened behind the scenes and sheds some new light on the nature of the new Sony and Disney deal. Kevin Feige has said that Spider-Man has the unique ability to move through movie universes. While that's a function of shared movie rights, it's not really that unheard of for Spider-Man in general. Despite the MCU and Robert Downey Jr. making Iron Man the belle of the ball, Spider-Man has always been the BMOC of Marvel, and as such, more than a few alternate versions of Spider-Man have arisen over time. They've ranged from the silly like Spider-Ham, to the genre-bending like Spider-Man Noir, to the alternates like Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse wasn't the first time that alternate Spider-Folk have met, but it was an effective demonstration of the multiverse. Anyway, this brings us back to those three Spider-Man and Fox's deleted tweet, some out-of-control magic, and the multiverse. The future for both the MCU and the DCEU will both lean heavily on the multiverse for many of the same reasons that the comic books started to use the multiverse all the way back when The Flash met The Flash in the 1961 issue of The Flash number 123. Put simply, continuity can become a burden to an ever-evolving story. It's difficult to keep a continuous story about a teenager with spider powers going since 1963. Even if Peter Parker was born in 1963, he'd be sneaking up on 60. He'd almost be older than Uncle Ben when Uncle Ben was met with tragedy. This is made even more complex when you're using actual actors. It's easy to just keep drawing Peter Parker as young, but unless the boyish Tom Holland starts sleeping in whatever magic well that's keeping Paul Rudd young, he'll eventually age. More than that though, the multiverse allows creators to tell alternate stories of the character. In the case of Spider-Man, that's included some very popular variations like Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales. Stan Lee saw this potential in one of his greatest creations along with Steve Ditko years ago, pointing out that when Spider-Man puts on his mask, he could be any one of us, and by extension is sort of all of us. So Feige wasn't really just talking about Spider-Man and the power that the new agreement gave him, but the nature of Spider-Man in general. The third Spider-Man movie, as of the moment of this video's release, will come out before Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. That movie, as the title indicates, will see the multiverse wreaking havoc on realities far and wide. Likely because Wanda found out that reality can be whatever she wants it to be. That means that the multiverse won't have been torn apart and pieced back together by the time the third Spider-Man movie will happen, but WandaVision will have already happened. From the trailers, we know that Monica Rambeau will likely get a front row seat to bursting through different realities, though not entirely voluntarily. Even before Wanda goes looking for her lost love by reshaping reality, all that Infinity Gauntlet snapping had to leave cracks here and there. Maybe that's how a version of J. Jonah Jameson from the Raimi Spider-Verse has made his way into the MCU. The further damage could have created an avenue for a version of Max Dillon to cross over as well. Only this time, apparently not blue, and maybe less parallels to Jim Carrey's Riddler. Whatever the resolution for that story is, Peter Parker is in a particular pickle. The Identity Cat is out of the bag, villains of different versions of him are popping up, and he might end up needing help as well. If Doctor Strange is showing up to put Max Dillon back in the universe he belongs in after Wanda's reality-bending ways opened a few too many doors, Peter Parker might get an out that allows him to slip into another dimension, one that's filling up with a half-dozen spider foes. Regardless, when Spider-Man crosses that threshold, he'll find himself in a world that is merged with an even half-dozen of his deepest foes. If the rumors of Tom Holland appearing in Venom 2 two turn out to be true, then he might already have one web-clad foot in that world. It might even be possible that the team starts as the Spider-Man haters club that it began as, but with characters who have moved somewhat into the anti-hero column, they end up in a Thunderbolt/Suicide Squad style situation, perhaps even led by Spider-Man. We'll have to wait and see how the multiverse starts to shape up in the MCU, with our first glimpse hopefully coming in December, but it's clear that we're closer than ever to the Sinister Six. And that's how the Sinister Six are shaping up in the MCU and Sonyverse. How do you think they'll come together, and who do you think will be on that final team? Let us know in the comments, and while you're there, why not subscribe to CBR for the latest videos in your inbox? Thanks for watching.